Hello there. I just found myself reflecting on how things have changed in the last 10 years, really to an extraordinary extent. I think it was, I'm just trying to think, when would it be that I first started to feel things really sort of like shifting out of a previous time into something else, yeah. And I suppose the first signs for me were around about maybe 2012, 2013. It's when things started to sort of like feel like, oh, well, you know, all of these sort of progressive causes and all of the supposed ideas that people had for bringing about positive change, they suddenly started to appear very strangely dysfunctional and a bit crazy, and like they were becoming essentially coercive. They had gone from somehow being the underdogs, you know, the supposed underdogs, yeah, to a real and manifest determination for power. And when I'm talking about, what I'm talking about here really is, I guess, it's kind of like, it's activists and all this sort of stuff, who've always been a bit of a sore point for me. But that's when things started to really start to seem a bit crazy, you know. And then we progressed further on, and what we started to see happening then, and it was across Europe, it just wasn't just the UK, we were starting to see all sorts of things, notably really quite appalling Islamist attacks, such as on the Charlie Hebdo offices, and about this closing down, this attacks on free speech and everything, in the name of what were essentially blasphemy laws for an alien culture, essentially. Yeah, we started to see that. The kind of like the strident craziness of all of the, what you would call the woke, what started to become known as the woke brigade, and of political correctness, and all of these things like pushing for various sort of, pushing for supposed, you know, rights, but actually what they were pushing for was essentially imposition of their own kind of dictatorial laws upon other people, yeah, very punitively. We started to see that escalate, and this was quite different to how things used to be, where essentially people used to campaign for the removal of bad laws. Now people were campaigning for the imposition of laws to restrict other people, yeah, and there's a completely different scenario. We started to see that. We started to get this massive increase in sort of like migrant crises and stuff, yeah, and of migrants flooding countries, and notably migrants from the Muslim world and from the Middle East, and this was absolutely exacerbated by the pouring of migrants into Germany in 2015 at the behest of the Chancellor then. And we saw in the very early 2016, we saw things like the attacks on that New Year's Eve in that German city. Was it Frankfurt? I can't remember. But we saw these. I can't remember if it was Frankfurt or Cologne. But we saw these attacks anyway. Yeah. And immediately, politicians here, Labour politicians here, started to downplay this. And I remember one politician saying, "It's no more than women face in Birmingham every Saturday," which was absolutely the most appalling lie. But of course, it's what they would come out with. Yeah, we started to see that. Later that year, of course, we had the Brexit vote, the Brexit referendum, and that's when something really switched. because after the Brexit referendum in the UK, suddenly people hadn't done what they were told to do. And it was quite clear that an entire class, an elite class, decided that basically over half the country was backward, racist, and deplorables, to use Hillary Clinton's parallel words, yeah, and that they would be and they should be punished, and those people have never stopped since then. That's when you saw something come into play in British society and British politics, which was that there was a kind of almost like the declaration of, it was a declaration of revenge against, essentially against the British working classes for daring to disobey their betters. Yeah, and that's what we saw coming into play there. That has never stopped since then. It really hasn't. Obviously, we saw all sorts of things since then, with attempts to derail that vote, to overturn it, to overturn that what was, whether you liked it or not, it was one of the biggest and most participated in democratic processes that we ever saw in this country. Yeah, it really was, if not the biggest. That definitely started something off, you know. We saw all sorts of things mounting throughout the culture then, and we then saw the birth of what people christened culture wars, culture wars, yeah, which is funny because, like, the use of like cultural themes and the treating of cultural themes as a means of furthering political goals is something which the left had specialized in since the 1960s. But now people were pushing back against it. It was suddenly called culture war. Yeah. So apparently it wasn't a culture war when the left were doing it, but when people objected to what the left were doing, then it became a culture war. That's just continued. Yeah. For a long time, yes, it was concerning because people were being cancelled, people's lives were being damaged, certainly. Yeah. But compared to what we have now, that still seems mild. Yeah. What has happened this year with the election of a Labour government on a relatively small vote, thanks to the complete collapse of totally useless and corrupt Conservative governments. Yeah. Since the election of that government and of Keir Starmer, who I think is without doubt the worst and the most iniquitous politician I have seen in my lifetime at this stage. Yeah. Since then, we've seen a wholesale shift in things, and what we've seen is the emergence of actual totalitarian methods. People arrested for sharing or for voicing what were taken to be forbidden opinions online. Those people then being branded as guilty before trial by the government itself in things that were put out, you know, promising that these people would be prosecuted and that they were guilty, essentially. Specifically that they were guilty already, yeah. The fast tracking of these people through courts without jury trial, yeah, being hauled before magistrates and such like, and being handed severe sentences for being present at protests, for calling the police scum, yeah, etc., etc., and things like that. Things which are absolutely, totally de rigueur for the left, yeah, like, you know, yeah, but not for the working class, and especially not for the white working class. So we had that happening. We actually have political prisoners, yeah. We actually have political prisoners, one of whom has died already, Peter Lynch. I think he's Peter Lynch. Is it Peter Lynch? Yeah, I think so. Has died already, yeah. So we actually have political prisoners imprisoned for their stated views, yeah. And this has continued in this way, one thing and another. We now have the government, which is, I think, probably the most unpopular government in living memory at this point in time, I think, certainly after such a short period of time in power, absolutely so, are now talking about cancelling various local elections which will be coming in May. They will be, and they're talking about cancelling these elections, and they're saying, well, this is a reorganisation where there are boundaries of constituencies are going to be changed, and so the councils can sort of like can apply to have the elections deferred, basically for 1 or 2 years, yeah. So at a very time when this government is utterly unpopular, is imposing really, really dictatorial and totalitarian measures upon people, and is almost certain to get very badly hit in the next elections. They're actually cancelling. They're proposing to cancel elections. Yeah. I haven't even gone into the thing that caused the disturbances over the summer. Yeah. Which has been, looks like it has been covered up, and you know, that hasn't been fast tracked, by the way. Of course, that hasn't. The prosecutions in that case haven't been fast tracked. In fact, they've been deferred to a time when it looks like they're going to be buried in the news. But I haven't even touched on that. Yeah. But we have this awful situation now. And the thing is, people in this country in general don't know what socialism is, yeah? You want to know what socialism is, ask people from Eastern Europe, ask people from Venezuela, yeah? Ask people from the former Soviet Union. You want to know what socialism is, yeah? People in this country have not a clue. People who call themselves socialist in this country generally think of socialism as a kind of, it's basically social democracy. It's basically social democracy. It's basically kind of social liberalism, with maybe a bit of a smattering of Marxist terminology thrown about a little bit. Yeah, labour laws, welfare. They think that's socialism. They haven't got a clue. But there are people in this government who I think know what socialism is, and they want it, and that's what they are pushing for. And that's what we see, basically. We see people now pushing for actual socialism, but a 21st century form of socialism, yeah. I would expect now the next things to come through. Oh, and I didn't even touch upon the pandemic, yeah, and lockdowns and the pushing of all these things. We're still pushing mRNA, mRNA therapies here in this country and the population. But what do we have now? I would expect that there are a number of things which are coming next, yeah. A lot of this stuff is very, very global related. It's globalist as well, yeah. That's quite, this is just how these people operate, yeah. This is how these people operate, yeah. I would expect more curtailing of social freedoms in the name of the environment and in the name of the climate crisis, yeah. I would expect that. I would also be looking out for any pushes to introduce digital ID, and following that, a centralized programmable digital currency, which, along with things like facial recognition software and the ideological capture of things like the police force and the law courts, basically means that what you have is a system of a kind of social credit system, very much modeled upon the kind of thing that we have in communist China. And that is what I think, and that's what I think our rulers have in mind. Yeah, of course, it's very, very important for us to actually resist that. And in addition to that, to maintain our dignity and to maintain a positive frame as far as we can, and to have a sense of our roots and to have a sense of our culture, what roots us actually, and to have each other. That's what's really important, I think, because obviously for now there are very bad people in a lot of places of power, and there are a lot of foolish and stupid people who are still prepared to either tolerate them or to even support them. Shameful as that idea is. But that's why I say we have to be positive. We have to have each other. We have to have a sense of our roots. And we have to have a sense of our humanity, because none of these people have any of that. So remember that. All things pass, and these people will pass too.